Sipumelele, and my job is to take you through the background report. Before I get to that, one thing we never get to say each year is huge thank yous to the people who helped put this together. So I know it would be more convenient if the background report was just, the feelings in my heart. But there are a bunch of people who work really hard developing advisory notes, which are connected to your report that we draw on. There's a bunch of people who review the report, who provide editing support. So just a huge thank you for helping us put this together so that we can have such a rich report. Where I wanted to start this year, and I know that a lot of us have been in this community for a long time, we've been attending for a while, and we understand most things. But I think what would be helpful is just to explain a couple of things. So the two reports we'll talk about today are SACE, the South African Systemic Evaluation, and SACMEC. And it's important to note what they measure, just because I do think some things get lost in translation sometimes. So one, PILS, the one we've been talking about for a while, 81% of learners cannot read for meaning, is tested in home language. I know it's grade 4s, and sometimes there's a little bit of confusion. Is there a switch? It's home language. SACE, grade 3, South African assessment, home language, which is also LALT. Grade 6, grade 9, LALT, which is English or Afrikaans. And then SACMEC, English and Afrikaans, because it's in grade 6. Just to make sure we're all talking about the same thing, because sometimes there is a little bit of talking past each other. So I'm pretty keen on SACE, Tina. And the main reason for that is that it kind of affirms what we already knew through PILS, and it shows us that only 20% of learners are reading at grade level, right? This is important and it's useful because we did spend a lot of time in previous years to PILS or not to PILS, amazing octopus or not to amazing octopus, but this is our very own assessment, and it's at a grade 3 level in home language, and same. Only 20% of learners in grade 3 are at grade level. Same again, around that these results are around socioeconomic status, around language. So if you're doing English or Afrikaans, you did better. If you're in a wealthier school, you did better. Languages that are doing bad on same. So it's not useful to dwell on this, but I think it's really useful that it is a report that was initiated by the DBE, and now we can all get along and around these results. What we're going to do, the other thing that's really useful, and to commend the DBE on SACE, is that one of the big complaints around PILS was that all you know is that all these learners can't read for meaning, right? And there's all this 80% down. What we do have a little more insight in now is what's happening at that lower end, so those emerging and evolving learners and how to describe them. However, all these reports need to be read with a little bit of diligence, right? So if you look down here at this emerging level, it tells us that these learners are beginning to develop grade level foundational knowledge and skills. If you look at the clue on the description for grade 3, the same level says knowledge of basic single sounds learned so far, and one level up above that says single and double sounds learned so far. Those are grade 1 and 2 competencies. We looked at a couple of languages, and those can be grade 1 and 2 competencies. So what you shouldn't be thinking about is that learners at the low end are beginning to develop grade level skills, but rather that it's this big bracket that it could include learners that are up to 1 to 2 years behind. So there is a little bit of engagement that you do have to do with these reports, but again, we had that report last year by Gabby and Bianca that also showed us that through PILS, the learners performing at around 200 points, which matched the learners that weren't able to get a single question right, who didn't have foundational skills, were at around that 27-30% level. So same again. And then we're going to read SACMEC together as a family and come to some conclusions. So what we've been waiting for quite a bit around SACMEC is what do we know about teacher knowledge? So what we should, at least for me, think about as we're reading this is let's read it with enough grace that it provides some encouragement, but with enough suspicion that, well, let's read it. So SACMEC is measured on 8 levels, 1 to 4, basic, 5 to 8, advanced. But let's also all agree in this room that what we expect from teachers so they're able to cascade learners to the higher levels is that they're all at level 8 plus, right? That's the only thing that would make sense. So encouragingly, what we are seeing between 2013 and 2021 is that 64% of teachers used to be at the highest level, and now we have around 93%, with like most of them in level 7 and a negligible amount on the other levels. Good story, encouraging. The SACMEC maths results are slightly more confusing. So what we see here is what you saw in the previous ones, which is what you wanted to see, is like a chunk of teachers at that high level. What you see here is like a more even distribution, right? So you see more, even though most of teachers, like 90%, are at levels 5, 6, 7, and 8, you're still seeing a chunk of them at level 5, at level 6, at level 7, and level 8, which is, it's not what you want to see for like high-performing teachers who can, move learners. Also, a little concern is the growth in teachers at that very basic level from around 1% to 7%. The provincial picture raises slightly more concerns. So the first thing is, please do not ask me why Free State is 114%. Those are the numbers. We are where we are. So let's just ignore and keep going. So what we see here is that there are 3 provinces where less than 20% of teachers are performing at that very high level. Concerning. Another 3 provinces where we're seeing a lot of growth at the low end, right? The one thing that is also peculiar is you see around 8% of teachers in Gauteng at level 1. Now, I think we're very used to accepting bad results very quickly, but we should be circumspect when only one province, which is Gauteng, has 8% of teachers performing at level 1. These results become even more confusing if we're looking at particular provinces. So in this example, I'm looking at Western Cape and Gauteng. So if you look at the reading scores in Gauteng and the Western Cape, big gains in overall scores, right? 103 points for Gauteng and 30 points for the Western Cape. If you look at their math scores, huge declines. 77 points for Gauteng and 141 points for Western Cape. You don't expect a system to move like this, right? You also don't expect the same teachers being tested to perform like this. We also don't see any major things happening in the system. So when I'm saying that as a family, we need to kind of talk about what the conclusions are, I think there is some primary data analysis that may be useful in looking at some of these results. And I think we're so used to bad news that it may not be useful to be like, oh, all the maths teachers are performing at this. There is a little bit more investigation that needs to go into this. Looking at proactive provinces, so I thought it would be a good way after looking at some of these assessments to see what some of the provinces are doing. So what's really commendable, again, by the DBE is releasing SACE, but it is limited in that, like all other assessments that we participate in, it's sample-based, right? So it's representative at national level and at provincial level. And so what we're not always able, what we're not able to do is use these results to see what's happening in schools or to kind of allocate resources within provinces, within districts. Using this quote by Nuga Deliwe and Van der Berg, the best kind of system of assessments is that you have sample-based that are high stakes at a policy level, but then you also have universal assessments that are high stakes, school level, parents can mobilize, and that you can use them to allocate resources within the province. So we're going to have an entire panel of this because I think it's really good news, but you have these 4 provinces that are doing interesting things in assessment. The one that I really want to single out here is one, Gauteng. So the model they use is to use district and provincial officials to collect the data. They focus on oral reading fluency for grade 3 learners. What's interesting is the way they do the training, the way they use their assessors. Theirs is the cheapest. You see the most expensive being Western Cape, which is also useful for telling us data at a national level, all the way down to Gauteng, which is around 600,000 rand. Really useful for under-resourced provinces that are thinking of what to do around assessment. But just to further visualize why this is useful, so this is like a sample from the Eastern Cape pilot. So what they did was to collect letter sound knowledge data from grade 1s, some off data from grade 3 learners, and they also did a written assessment. Each one of those lines is a school. And if you're red, these are grade 3 learners. On the red, they can't read a single word. If it's dark green, those learners are at grade level, using the DBE benchmarks. So what you see here, and it's like a long, long, long list, but there's a lot of variation within schools. And this is the kind of knowledge a school or a teacher would want as to what to do with their learners and where they are performing. But for the province or the district, what this is helpful for is beginning to set thresholds for what are red schools. So think of a school that has greater than, like more than a third of learners who aren't yet at grade level. Is a school you want to be thinking about sending those subject advisors to? We know what kind of resource constraints we have. Or when a province is thinking around something like teacher training, how do you modify and send teachers to the right kind of training based on where their learners are performing? So these are some really interesting developments by provinces to try and close those gaps between these sample-based assessments. Some of these are also sample-based, but some of them are at this pilot stage where they are thinking about what scale could possibly look like. Something that Prof. Vanderberg is here, so he'll present on it, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, but I think what we normally do at the reading panel is under promising programs, we present on a pilot or some kind of program implemented by an NGO that shows some kind of promise. What we're talking about today is a province, the Western Cape, and their Back on Track program, which they allocated 1.3 billion over 3 years to target learning losses. So there's a lot that goes into the program, but let's say the main thing is they targeted mainly grades 4, 7s, and 8, and there was teacher training every 2 weeks, and these learners also attended Saturday classes. What we see here is we saw effect sizes if learners had just attended 5. So there's a maximum of 10, 1 day was rained out, and they attended a maximum of 9. We see grade 4 learners in language having effect sizes up to 195 days of a school year. A school year is 200 days. Now, what is important to note is you can't untangle COVID bounce back from this program. But I think the point for us is to see promise of a program led by a province to actually do something about COVID learning losses. And obviously, this doesn't only refer to learning losses. It gets us thinking about what does remediation at scale actually look like. It gets us thinking about if these learners were only attending 9 Saturday classes, what kind of inefficiencies are in the system that our learners are attending 200 days and are not learning. The other interesting piece of data this gives us, but also the Western Cape Systemics, is that none of the cohorts in grades 3, 6, or 9 in 2023 were performing at that pre-COVID level. So those who don't read graphs, 2019 is all the way up there at 0, and if they were performing at the same level or above, you'd expect those lines there in 2023 to be right at the top again. Again, questions around where are these learners, what are we doing about them? Some of them are in grade 6 now, some of them are in grade 8 now, and they still have these backlogs. Something really interesting for us was thinking about our repetition policy in the foundation phase, just because there is such high repetition in the foundation phase, in particular in grade 1, and the connection between home language mastery and EFL results and repetition in grade 4. And so this study shows that home language mastery is positively associated with higher EFL results. I mean, you'd expect that, but higher EFL results and less repetition. This is interesting for us because in some ways, repetition does cause a strain on the system, larger class sizes, etc. And so what you want to see is that your repetition policies are useful in learners learning more, so not just to hold them back. But what we see here is that if you repeat grade 1, you are, I think it's around 20 percentage points more likely to also repeat grade 4. Learners who are condoned are 31 percentage points more likely to repeat grade 4. And a lot of those learners were not getting 50% in home language at the end of grade 3. What's really interesting for us, mostly because I love the EGRS and I go to bat for it all the time, is it would be good for everybody to read these 2 new reports that come out. One, the one by Umu Hohlwane, shows us that, sorry to go back, EGRS, coaching intervention, led by the DBE, had large effect sizes. And what we see is that there are also spillover effects into the home language. So if you improve home language, it has positive effects on EFL. The other one shows some of the first data on sustained impacts. I think a lot of us speak anecdotally about investing in the foundation phase, and you'll reap these results later. But this is some of the various data, especially on the continent, following learners from grades 1 to 7, and how these impacts are sustained and they decrease repetition. System-level constraints. So I think for us, what's been very interesting, I think we all know that the budget has been in the news for a long time. We spoke about it a lot last year. The public service wage bill, 7 billion rand in the hole, putting pressure on the system. But something really interesting Bianca was looking at is how different provinces are being impacted by expected constraints. So this is all on projected budgets. And that even where provinces, the blue line, so the cost of teachers, and Michael corrected me yesterday and was like, either it's the cost of teachers or the headcount is increasing. If you see those, the one in the blue, even where provinces are able to not increase their cost of teachers, the problem is their overall expenditure is decreasing at a faster rate. So the cost of teacher wages is eating a lot more into this overall budget, which is a problem. And so without expressing any kind of opinion on should we be spending this much on teachers, because the main thing is that if we have good, well-trained teachers in classroom with resources and within a reasonable environment, we expect learning outcomes to increase. I think one of the problems we should be thinking about, which Martin's going to speak about a bit later, is are we thinking about the right teachers in the right phase in the right language? So we see in Martin's background report is we're overproducing secondary school teachers, around double, and we're underproducing foundation phase teachers. So like half the number of foundation phase teachers that are required are being produced. And then if you look at that in specific languages, it's like in some languages it's up to as little as 20% of the required cohort. So if we're thinking about this 80% and thinking about it better and it's encroaching on the budget, we need to think quite strategically about how to use these resources a lot better, even if we continue to spend this much on teachers, and we need to be a lot more strategic about it. Prof spoke about the budget that almost was. I think the main point here is we're all really happy about these new announcements. I think we're all on board, and we think they're good in whatever way, that there's support for ECD, that there's support for grade R, etc. But if we're not thinking about these things really carefully, and we have a really, really bad track record of, as a country, of thinking through things, all these good things are just going to add additional strain to the system. So whilst we've seen some increases in the expenditure on grade R, it's projected to be around 7 billion in 2026-7. However, Treasury projects that we need 18 billion rand for grade R. There's a paper by Jessel and Gabi that says that we would need 5 times the amount of the current ECD subsidy for registered and quality early learning centers. So it's more about, and I know we like to tussle, this is not me saying which one is better, which one we should choose. It's just that we don't have a good track record on planning. And these kind of constraints, given our kind of fiscal situation, will lead us, yeah. I think what we tried to do this year is think about where are we in relation to 2030. It's really hard. What we can all agree on is that there's some shift in the air somewhere. So we were all really happy with this announcement. And before we all get really, really depressed and are like, it's just an announcement, nothing's going to happen, we know there was an announcement in 2019 about focusing on the foundation phase, but the one that's actually more similar to this is the 2010 announcement around the workbooks and the assessments, which led us to the National Workbook Program, which the government spends $1 billion on every year, and the annual national assessments, which we don't have anymore. But something once did happen after this kind of announcement. It's also a lot more specific, so maybe. We're also seeing kind of a change in the political at the DBE, right? Very specific messaging, very specific priorities on ECD, foundation phase, and mother tongue-based bilingual education. Again, there's something happening in the air. And then even at the administrative level, we're seeing green shoots of something, right? So there was this call for, I can't remember what it was called, but they were going to update the foundation phase catalog. And we're seeing very similar language that we want to see from the DBE, right? This minimum package of materials, that they contain lesson plans, and they even mention the DBE benchmarks. And what we've always wanted to see is a lot more of what's happening in the research unit filtering down into all the other directorates. Again, it's something. Yeah. I think the other thing that's a little bit what's useful is that the DBE has started to develop this national strategy on literacy. I think it's still at the kind of beginning stages. We have seen it. There's some good things coming out of there also around a minimum package and a couple of other things. So something is starting to move. I don't think we're at the same place as we were in 2022 when the panel started. However, and I think what we're really going to hear and be challenged on by Jaime today is we have no consolidated plan. All these things are green shoots. None of these things are directly related. There is no center holding all of this together to cause some kind of large-scale system change. And so the recommendations of the reading panel remain the same this year. There is some notable change. So there has been the CHE has started on the audit of the B.Ed degrees. There's some question on how that will lead to improved quality in the degree, and that is yet to be seen. So we are keen, but we are cautious. And I think it's always good to, because we've separated these recommendations at a provincial and a national level, to give a big kudos to the provinces, because they are really moving on some of these recommendations, as you've seen in previous reports, and then also, as you'll see today, on assessments. So I thought a really good way to end this, and sorry to embarrass our guest speaker, and I'm going to do that awkward thing of reading it out, but I think you can hear South Africa in every single line in this. The piece of results came out 3 weeks after I started, so those results were a baseline for us. Peru was last of the 65 countries of PISA. Not bottom 10%, last. And that was a shock. We could have decided to play the results down to say that Peru has improved since 2009, which it had, but we are better than many other countries that didn't even take PISA. Or, my favorite, it is an OECD examination that is alien to our culture and priorities. But we didn't go down that route. Instead, we decided to own the problem, to use the results to say, look, we're in trouble, we're in deep, deep trouble. Thank you.